Hi and welcome to Dynamics Update. This time we will be discussing mostly around 10.0.19, but we also have some discussions around features and other general items that has to do with Dynamics 365 for finance and operation. And with me as usual, I have Gustav. Hi, Gustav.
Hello. And we should say that the reason for us going a little bit out of the features topic is that there isn't that many interesting features this version. Well, there are a lot, of course, but it's both large and small. So we also took the liberty of asking our colleagues at Engage to post tips and pointers from the whole spectrum of finance and commerce and supply. So hopefully we got something for everyone today. Right, Johan?
Yeah, I think the explanation is mostly because Microsoft has been doing their business application summit.
Yeah, exactly.
So since the release notes for 10.0.19 came out before MBAS, this is probably the reason why these are fairly empty. There are some gems, some highlights that we will definitely discuss. So, Gustav, how do you feel about starting?
Yeah, I can start. I'll start with a small one. It's really on the Power Apps part. It's the passing of legal entity, and a tip from a colleague of ours, the passing of legal entity context to the embedded Canvas app. And this one came to my mind, I reacted to it because I didn't really consider this was not the case before. I haven't really worked with that many embedded Canvas apps. I've worked a lot with Power Apps as individual apps, but not that much with embedded ones in Dynamics, and I knew they were context aware. I just didn't know you weren't able to pass the legal entity, which kind of is a base requirement if you need to deploy it across organizations. So this feature really improves it. As they say, it improves the integration. I would say it would be a base feature, but now it's there at least. You're able to pass the user's current legal entity into the embedded Canvas app, and thereby really then you can really leverage on the customizability of Power Apps without having to modify your Dynamics application. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think the main reason for this not having been there before is that mostly when you have these embedded apps, what you're looking at, for instance, is that when you select a customer, for instance, you will see information about that customer maybe from CRM, which is collected into a embedded app. And the reason why you don't need the legal entity there is because the customers still have a unique customer ID. It's not unique based on the legal entity. It's unique in the entire instance, which means that you will get the correct customer anyway.
Well, that's not really the case for customers as customers from Custable. I mean, those can be... That can be an issue if you cannot define the legal entity. I think maybe in many cases they are global. I agree, and that it won't be an issue. But I think a lot of tables are still legal entity sensitive, especially financial data. So I think that makes a lot of sense to keep there. And let's see if it's used. I don't really know how many people are using Power Apps. It's a really nice feature. I mean, as embedded Power Apps, but it makes sense to kind of be able to isolate it. And especially, I would say, maybe not all companies want to have the Power App deployed as embedded, and then you can enable it and really make use of it for that specific entity or legal entity.
Yep.
So what's your next one?
So my next one is the tax service. Tax is one of those that is really annoying because for some strange reason every single country has their different tax laws.
Of course,
I know that I know, working with a colleague at my previous employer, she was tasked to set up sales tax for US, and she was totally annoyed with the fact that they could have different sales tax on different blocks in the same city.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is I mean, okay, so you're asking for trouble, right?
Yeah, of course. And I know, I mean, if you look globally from the Dynamics implementation perspective, I think Brazil and India are among the most fiscalized countries in the world. And I know Brazil, they have very, very complex invoicing laws. I mean, you have to print 5 copies of the invoice, one has to be buried underneath a full moon. It's like really, really, really complicated. India as well. Now they do flat tax, I think, across India. So they had to, all that time they spent customizing ERP to fulfill the local tax laws now had to be rolled back to fulfill the flat tax. But you're right, it's really complicated and it's very, very geographically sensitive as well. And it's prone to change a lot due to legal reasons, of course. So it's really something that has been the cause of many, many hours of customization. So I too like this microservice approach they're taking, both for inventory now, the inventory visibility app, and supply chain scale unit, as well as this tax service. It doesn't sound that interesting with a tax microservice, but I think it really makes a lot of sense. I agree.
Yeah, and I think this also indicates one thing that I've been thinking about since I started working with Dynamics. I as you know, I'm not that old in the game, so I've been here for like 6 years or so.
You're too humble, you are.
yeah, but the thing is that there are a lot of things that customers tend to invent, even though they shouldn't ever have to think about this. And
Exactly.
I mean, that's my discussion around electronic reporting, for instance. I mean, if you have legal required documentation, there shouldn't be any reason whatsoever for the customer to have to build them, because Microsoft is fully aware that these are always, I mean, the Swedish tax authorities always require exactly the same document.
Yeah, I agree completely, and especially now with evergreen. I mean, part where you can expect, because you pay for a subscription, you can expect for it to be legally compliant. So of course, I mean, the historical parts have been a nightmare, like you say, a lot of customizations. But at the same time, I think the customization part, or maybe the enhancement part, comes into play with the various scenarios, like intense transaction volume, basically, where even with the 5 rings that they use for testing, they haven't really encountered these types of retail transactions where you have a lot of volume. Maybe those reporting requirements aren't sufficient. They are legally sufficient, but you can't the local tax authority can't receive those those volumes of reports. That might be one thing.
I totally understand this, but this tax service falls under exactly the same way, because
exactly.
if you have two customers, if you have two companies in the same country, it's not like they're using different tax laws.
No, or they shouldn't.
They might be, depending on which type of business they're performing.
Yeah, of course,
VAT,
but
it's still rules.
Exactly.
I mean, why not build a microservice that is updated as soon as a country's tax authorities changes the rules? This one is updated, because I mean, once it is changed, there's no going back anyway. So there is no one that can say, "Oh, we didn't know. We need to use the old rules." No, you have new rules. Use them.
Exactly.
I mean, you don't have to invent these things, and I think that I was so confused by the fact that there was actually a lot of ISVs selling like exactly this service, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I know.
For AX 2012 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I mean, it should be built in.
And it is, well, built in, and now it's built out. But
yeah, but it should be part of the service that you're buying. It shouldn't be something that you need to invest on.
On that note, I mean, a lot of microservices are being deployed right now, like you said as well. The supply chain scale unit, the commerce scale unit, the inventory visibility app. So a lot more maintenance goes into LCS and maintaining environments. So that's just something to note. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, but it needs to have its proper place. And I think all the ones up until now, at least, do. I just don't want to see them spin up microservices that don't really have a use, but I think the tax service absolutely does.
Yeah, and when we're speaking about legal requirements, one of our colleagues actually mentioned that there are a couple of geographically legal documents that has actually been changed. So the SIE report and the SAFT report has also been fixed. So there are new versions of them. Might be minor things, but that's what I like about the electronic reporting. Since they're in the library, you can use them. You don't have to make these changes yourself. They are available.
Exactly. That's very good. It's very cool. All right. I had one more, and it's really a technical note, but it's just a heads up. And I think most haven't missed this. But if you're using OData a lot in your integrations, like Logic Apps from Power Automate, OData just calls basically. Microsoft has implemented or will implement from version 19 mandatory throttling, priority throttling basically. Priority-based throttling is the correct name for it. And what this means is that you need in all calls towards an OData endpoint, you need to implement a specific message called for retry, basically. So, and the purpose is the OData has always been kind of like, I'm not going to say the bad boy, but I think it's really nice. But whenever you get a question from an integrator who's not Dynamics aware, it's like, oh, you have APIs. Yes, we have APIs, of course. You can do synchronous calls. You can do lightweight messaging through OData. Okay, that's great. And then you realize, yeah, you can, but it really requires a lot of work. I won't say work, but it requires knowledge. You cannot use, or you should not use OData for like high volume posting journals, a lot of like high volume traffic. You can use it for lightweight operations, which are not in the millions, because you have an OData limit. First of all, how many client connections you can have. You can increase that, I think, but still, that limit is there for a purpose. That many OData calls will bring your environment down. And I think that's the reason for this priority throttling. You're able to actually have the messages coming in. They're just not coming in as fast as you might want. But what it does mean that you really have to implement this. Even though you might just use a number of messages per day or a very, very low volume, you still have to implement the priority-based throttling because it will be mandatory. So if you're using a lot of OData calls, look it up and see when and how you can implement it. Just a heads up.
Yes. So my first comment on this is that it was fairly interesting in one of my first projects actually. The limitations of OData was mentioned about say 6 months into the project. So once all of the BI reports were implemented using OData, someone mentioned just in bypassing, you shouldn't be using OData for business reporting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's paging.
But last week you said that it was okay. Yeah. No, we didn't. It's not okay. So that's the first one. It was a bit annoying. But the second one actually ties back to something that we've been discussing on and off before here, and it has to do with management of features. Because this was a feature before. This was used to be a feature that you could turn on, priority-based throttling, and now it's actually turned on for you. Even though you don't want it, it's still mandatory. So that brings me to how to manage features. And I've been thinking, because I have a customer who's discussing this, and I've been thinking a lot about this, because the problem, I think, is sort of historical. Because when you come from 2009 and 2012, you knew what you bought. You bought this fixed set of functionality, and it was not that often that you actually got new functionality, first of all. And when you did, it was a new main version, which required a lot of management just to upgrade. Because you need to merge every single line of code. You needed to verify that it worked in the new version, and you need to recompile. And it was a really huge job to handle. The problem now is that now we get, I looked through one of my customers' environment. They have like 500 plus features that hasn't been enabled.
Yeah.
So they haven't enabled any features. That's the thing. So I started thinking about how should we recommend doing this? Because I think our customers are in the same, most of the customers are in the same discussion, because they are not used to getting all of these features all the time. So they don't really know how to handle them. Exactly. So my main argument is that I think that you should handle them the same way you handle updates. You should have them all enabled. There are features that you don't want enabled. Then you should have a specific reason why you shouldn't have them enabled. But all of the other features, you should by default, you should enable them. Of course you need to test, of course you need to verify, of course you need to verify that they don't break anything. That's it goes without saying, but the goal should be that the list of features that are not enabled should be mostly empty.
Yeah, you're right. And I think it sounds a little drastic to enable everything, because there are some features that are quite scary, but a lot of them are just new features, new buttons, like canceling a transfer order shipment. That's very nice. Doesn't hurt to have it. Canceling one nice feature, which is I think we discussed it in one of the last pods, the cancellation of a batch job, which has been a historical issue. You have to kind of restart the OS for it to go from canceling to cancelled, because the thread in the background is not dying. It just keeps running. This is a way to cancel. So all of those are like, yeah, sure, just enable them, because it just gives you new possibilities. Then there are some, like the new grid, the new views, stuff that really, really require you to test it through with the end users, because it drastically changes the perception of the system, the way it works, the way it remembers the last link, stuff like that. So it makes sense. We enabled the views in one of the previous engagements. We had to disable it due to, user adoption. It didn't work the way we intended to, although still has a lot of nice features, and I think a lot of people are using it now. I think it's a little drastic to automatically enable everything, but you're right. If you have the organization for it and everyone is okay with testing, I say at least go through all features for each new sprint or release or whatever schedule you have, and make a valid decision. Do we want it? Yes. Can we use it? Yes. Let's enable it. Do we want it? Yes. Does it bring any business enhancement? Yes. Then let's do it. So I think, like you say, you need to have a proper reason for it. Enabling Malaysian tax if you're only running Sweden, maybe not. So there are a lot of stuff that you don't want enabled. And I'm missing in some cases, and in many cases there are parameters for it as well. You can enable the feature, but then you still need to activate it via like accounts payable parameters, or etc. But make sure there is a legal entity parameter as well for the feature if it gives new functionality. From a logic perspective, it makes sense to have a legal entity parameter as well. You might want the feature on, but only for a specific company.
Yes, I just want to clarify. I'm not saying that you should automatically. I mean, there is a way to set it to automatically enable all new features. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that your default answer to should we enable this or should we not enable it should probably be yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
At least going forward. But if you have a reason why you shouldn't, then you should probably remove it. You should probably not use it. But the other problem here is actually when it comes to features like this priority-based throttling, the problem is that eventually it will be enabled for you.
Yeah.
So it's much better that you have already tested it and already have enabled it.
Yeah, exactly. And all the tests that you've run since enable it has been run with it enabled. So you get a lot free by enabling very early in your sprint or test cycle, because maybe you're not specifically testing it, but you're running all your other tests with it enabled. And when you get to the point where you want to use it, then you don't have to run that regression testing. Hopefully, it depends on what it is, of course, but in many cases, it makes sense to have it on already now in UAT or.
But I think there is actually one more aspect of this, and it's when you think about testing, when Microsoft is testing their latest updates, do you think they are testing it on an environment with all features enabled or with no features enabled or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I think it's all features enabled basically for that version. I think most of it.
That's why I'm saying that the default answer should probably be enable it.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Because when you install the update, it has been tested, but it has been tested because they can't test every single permutation of every single feature. That's impossible. That won't ever happen. So the only thing they are testing is all features enabled. Does it work? Yes, it does work. And as both you and I know, there are some really complex dependencies that could actually come back and bite you if you don't take them into account.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And another thing to add, sorry to interrupt, but I think one thing to add as well, which is not mentioned, is I've run into at least 2 cases the last like 2 months where I wanted to use something because of an issue that we had, but it wasn't enabled because we didn't enable it. I think that when you need to use it, you might not think you need to use it, but when you do need to use it, you need to have it enabled.
Yeah, and I mean there are questions about all of these country based features, the specific features for a specific region, and I mean from my perspective, in an ideal world, it would be that if you don't use Malaysia, it should be perfectly safe to enable Malaysia.
Yeah,
because
right.
it shouldn't make any difference whatsoever.
Emphasis here is shouldn't. So I think that's the reason why people don't enable it, because you think naturally enabling something gives you more risk that something will break. And I think that's just the way people feel. And I can't argue that you have to enable it.
And the way people feel doesn't naturally have to be rational.
No,
That's the problem. So
right.
my last aspect of this is actually, so if you have this customer that sort of I have, which have 500 plus not enabled features, how do you go about doing this? So one thing I actually learned that you shouldn't do is you shouldn't create a list of all of the features and send it out to all of the application consultants and say, please let me know which one I should enable, because you won't get any answer whatsoever. You need to slice the list. You need to break it down into smaller pieces. You can break it down by country. That could be nice. You could break it down start by breaking it down by stream. Okay, so all finance features. Here you have a list of all generic finance features that aren't country specific. Which ones should we enable? Okay, those are gone. Next, trade and logistics. Which features could we enable? Because then you have one person that is responsible for dealing with the list.
Yeah.
If you send out the list to everyone, no one will have time to look at it, and you wouldn't never get it.
Or you just enable all of them.
Yeah. I mean, what you could do, I don't recommend it, but what you could do is say, I will enable those on Friday if you don't tell me not to.
I think the rational way to go about it depends on your setup and on specifically on your capabilities to test. I mean, ideally you have a running test cycle, and hopefully you don't have 500 plus features to activate. Then, I mean, it's up to you to decide how many you need to activate. The ones that you need to use, go through, in any way, make sure you have a list. And then I would argue to just activate them before maybe a larger sprint test cycle where you have a larger release or something, so you're covering more scenarios in your tests. But otherwise, it's just running. I mean, it's not something you build. The risk of something breaking is less likely. It's more that you need to maybe change the way the process works. Let's take this transfer cancellation. I really like that one because it's been giving me some headache before. So previously you had a process where you had to like ship stuff back. Now you can just click cancel. So it's making a process easier than it was, but still you have to change the process because you don't want people spending time unnecessary time. So it's more that will change with some of these features than actually stuff breaking. But of course you need to test stuff breaking as well. So I think we spent enough time on the features, but it varies between instances, of course. But the default, like you say, the default answer, should I enable this feature, should be yes, unless you have a valid reason otherwise.
Yeah, and one thing that I should mention as well, that we have discussed when it comes to updates, I mean, you will not be the first one who tests this feature. Exactly. Because, first of all, it's already in the private preview program, so a lot of customers are testing it. I mean, I'm not saying that they're putting it through production tests. They are browsing it, verifying it, testing it a bit.
Yeah.
Then you have the first release users. Those are the ones who get the release before it goes general available. And those are required to run it in production.
Yeah.
Which means that when you get hold of the new features, they have already been run in production for a couple of weeks.
Exactly.
And not in a test environment. So that's important. And there are still features that are in preview. Of course, you shouldn't enable those in production unless you have a really, really, really good reason. There are reasons that you're in a situation where you desperately need this functionality. Good, then it's an informed decision. Otherwise, you shouldn't do it ever. And then you have the standard release ring. which is the fourth release ring, where we normal people get hold of it.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not that it's not tested, and I totally understand when it comes to, for instance, we have discussed this new grid as an example 100 times or so. There have been bugs, but to be fully honest, it was in preview a very long time, first of all, and secondly, the most of the problems was actually at least the later ones was in regards to RSAT. So it was in regards to automating testing.
Yeah, and among extensions, etc. But I agree, it's been really preview for quite some time, and that makes sense because it's a very, very key component of the UI. So they spend more time validating that one than they did for, I mean, smaller features. But in the end, I think the new grid, it needs to be there because the old one is like a legacy from AX with the fetching of specific records, etc. So I think that one, you can trust that it's tested properly, but you cannot trust that it's tested with your extensions. I think that's the simple summary of it. You still need to test it, but it's not that it's going to break in a vanilla environment, or most likely it won't break in a vanilla. You need to test it with your extension and with your end users. That's the whole point.
Yep. And also the new grid is an extremely good example, because I could put down a fairly large bet on the fact that this will be mandatory.
Yeah,
eventually,
of course. Yeah.
This will be mandatory. So if you haven't tested it and you miss the notification that it's going to be mandatory, then it will happen either you want it or not.
Yeah, and I think that will be the case for every new feature replacing an old one, because I mean, no one, especially not Microsoft, wants to maintain two separate features doing the same thing. In the end, you want to focus all your efforts on one. It makes sense. So you just need to phase it out. It's the deprecated feature. It's the same as any other system. So you just need to, again, stay up to date with what's coming and what's going out, because it is an evergreen system, and it's not. You can stay on the old version, but you won't be supported. So I mean, you really need to stay up to date. I have two more things, so I'll just take them two at the same time because they're both quite small, really. One is the commerce part. I just mentioned it because it's kind of close to heart. It's a specific promotion type, gift with purchase, which is something which is being used a lot, specifically in Sweden, a lot over the world. I would guess, where specifically fashion retail, buy this and get a beach hat or something. And it's always been a little complex to set up. Everyone is like, well, you set full 100% discount. And that, from a legal or financial perspective, that's always, I'm not going to say nightmare, but it's tricky to make it work. But now there is a real feature, a real discount type called gift with purchase. So it's just a small thing, but it makes it, I think, a lot easier, and you're able to configure it easier, specifically on hierarchy as well. You don't have to build these complex, like 3-for-2 structures where one of them is automatically 100% discount. Now you can use it the way it should be. And the last one I had, I think I already mentioned it. I just wanted to highlight the fact that they are investing a lot into the scale units in this version. A lot is put into the supply chain scale unit. So a lot of incremental enhancements for warehouse execution capabilities. So the supply chain scale unit is becoming more and more independent as an operating scale unit. So you get more and more functions to it. I don't know anyone who's using it fully right now, but it makes a lot of sense. I think the commerce scale unit put a lot of strain off the back-end dynamics. As I think the supply chain scale unit can also put a lot of strain off the back-end processing. So if you're using supply chain or warehouse management, you really need to look into using the scale unit. You don't have to use it for like regional purposes. It's just a way you can deploy it side by side, just to put some strain off on the Dynamics backend. So nice to see that they're putting a lot of effort into it. Still quite new, so needs testing, but it's a nice another move towards the scale unit or microservice architecture.
Yep, that's right. I just wanted to check for me, who is not working that much with retail. The gift with purchase one, are you also able to set like a percentage discount on that one? So it's not just free or not free. You can say that if you buy this, you can get this half off too.
The gift with purchase is specific. That's a gift basically. So that's really like zero. But you can use another type of discount, like threshold discount. You can get 20% off if you buy these and 3 for 2 is usually you get like the cheapest one, so there's a lot of complexity in that rule set. But when you have 3 for 2, you usually get the cheapest one for free. That's how the system is set up. But then you can define all types of like threshold discounts, quality discounts, etc. So it's all up to you, but try to limit the amount of variant-based discounts you need to keep. Instead, try to use hierarchy as much as possible, because it's performance intensive if you have a lot of discounts. But this is quite nice because you don't have to like hack the system to get a very, very common discount type. Then you can just set it up because it's there.
Yes, that's good. I think that's a good place to stop for today. If you would like, we've missed this a lot of times, but if you would like to send in a question or get in touch with us, you can always send an email on dynamicsupdate@engagegroup.se, because both me and Gustav will happily answer your questions, and we might even bring them into the podcast if they are something of interest for everyone.
Yeah, that would be great.
So with that being said, have a nice time until the next time, and bye-bye.
Good night, Johan. Thank you. Bye-bye.